Son of darkness, image of the end. Formulated genocide of fate in the souls.
Okay. Hello, children. Chapter 3. Izano followed the western road, walls of barley on each side, muddied by rainfall from the previous night. The road was rutted with water-filled holes. Oren, his thin legs surprisingly graceful, avoided jarring his unconscious passenger and followed his master's careful steps. Ripples in the murky puddles caught Izano's eye. The cavalry from the north must be nearing the fallen Roman outpost. They would soon set out after the Maccabees' raiders, but the night's rain was heavy and washed away their route of escape. To Izano's misfortune, his were the only fresh tracks leaving the outpost, and the Romans would not hesitate to take him into slavery and torture the wounded zealot to give up his brothers. He held up a hand for Oren to stop and lifted the Hebrew's head from the side saddle. Gentle fingertips pressed the man's neck. He felt a light pulse. This was improved compared to the faint, near-lifeless sighing he observed when he found him near dead in the bloodied outpost. He untied a dried sheep's stomach from Oren's burden of supplies and uncorked the water skin. He poured a mouthful of the stagnant water past his dried lips, then drained the remainder down Oren's greedy throat. Head tilted back to get the last trickle. The camel's lips sucked past his large yellow teeth. Izana patted the camel's mangled coat and ran his fingers through the sandy brown hair. Time to leave the road, friend. He pulled a handful of oats from a pouch and cupped Oren's muzzle to allow him to feed. Clay red, a puddle reflected Izana's darkened features. He dipped the skin into the water and watched the air be forced out and bubble to the surface. He took Oren by the reins and led him into the northern field. After going several steps deep, Izana took a stride back and Oren followed his example. They backtracked with slow and careful strides, both stepping in their previous tracks until crossing the road into the southern field. Izana pointed to the southwest and gave Oren a sharp slap on his hindquarters, then made his way back to the road. To make it appear as if they had gone north, he used the muddied water from the puddle and blurred the tracks going south. A pounding of hooves drawing near, Izana used his hands to blend each print into the normal contour of the road before disappearing behind the tall stalks of grain. He did not wait to see if the Romans took the ruse and chased a ghost into the north, but he hurried after Oren. Izana traveled from field to field and dried wilderness to oasis. Whatever pursuit he had feared, it had long passed. The Hebrew had done little but groan and fade in and out of consciousness, long enough to choke down a drink of water. A fever had overtaken him, and Izana knew they must rest soon or the journey would kill him. The sun setting, he found shelter amongst a grouping of palm trees and made the febrile man a bed, covering him with his own blanket. With a snort, Oren bent his forelegs and laid his chin on the sand. He was disgruntled with the tiresome burden that was the center of his master's attention. Izana patted Oren's head, and the camel's ears twitched, as if to shoo away a fly. "Keep watch, old friend." Oren's large pupils rolled lazily after his master. And watched him climb a sandy ridge. Dust swept in tiny whirlwinds at his feet, the particles brought to ethereal life by the golden and purple sheen of the sunset. The ground gave way to a vertical cliff that dropped to the sea, stretching beyond sight in the afterglow of the day. Galilee. Peaceful waves washing over the rocks below, Izana knelt at the cliff's edge. He had traveled so far, and now his journey was near to its end. Burning out like a candle, the sunset formed a red line on the horizon. Izana could see the western star clearly, even before the night had fallen. It was less of a distant mirage tonight. It felt close and real. A fear lingered deep in his heart. He knew the end of the journey would be the beginning of the real trial, his true test. This is what he had long waited for, and feared since he had taken up the sword of Sha'ar. Most of all, he did not know if he could face it alone. Izana and his two brothers had all taken separate paths in search of the star's leading. Before parting ways, he had instructed them to seek out a warrior to aid in their cause, and carry on the torch if he did not see the end of this task. Perhaps he had found his pupil. Izana left the cliff and took a place beside Orin. The zealot slept undisturbed. It was clear his body had either won the fight against the bacterium or succumbed to the fever. He turned his eyes toward the twilight painting its way across the blackening sky. This man had been placed in his path, and he himself had been a keeper of the blade for a near 600 years. He knew his time was short, but did not expect a wounded man near death to take up his mantle. Not when he was close to finishing the task the Brotherhood had been waiting for centuries past. Orin snorted as if agreeing with his master's thoughts. Izana scratched the camel's scruff of a beard beneath his chin. "It is not our place to question, but to obey," he spoke, knowing the words were more to steel his own resolve. "I only hope we're not too late." The night was chiller than Izana had expected, with his only blanket wrapped around his unnamed and unconscious companion. With achy bones and stiff muscles, he roused a belligerent Orin and searched through their dwindled supplies. Dried figs speckled with sand were all that remained of the provisions. Up until now, he avoided any city, scrounging for wild game and sometimes going days without seeing a single edible leaf. He stripped a section of needles off a nearby cactus plant and made an upward incision with his knife. Carving a small hole into the core of the wide plant, he inserted the uncorked end of his water skin. Izana left the skin to collect the cactus juice and went about making ready for their journey to the sea. An old inn with a carving of a sailfish above the door was his destination. Being at the southern tip of the sea, where the Jordan formed, Izana judged the distance to be a full day's walk. Except for the Roman occupation, the people of Galilee would pay him little mind. The trouble was avoiding being caught with the Maccabees in his tow. Logic restrained him from hoping he'd reunite with his companions at the inn. They parted ways months ago, agreeing the first to arrive would leave a note behind, but continue on his way, for time was short. However, he still could not fight the desire to have a brother at his side once again. A groan drew Izana from his thoughts, and he knelt at the Hebrew's side. At his touch, his eyes opened and stared in blurred confusion into the Ethiopian's dark features. He felt the man's head and neck for fever, but only a slight heat remained. "You are mending." The zealot tried to move, but managed only a grimace. "Is it so? I do not feel as such. The fever drained your strength, and your ribs are bruised from the arrow, but it's better than being in the hands of the Romans." Izana ran his fingers over a lump swelling on the side of the man's head. "But I missed that too." The zealot traced the lump that was covered by his dark curls. "After I'd suffered the arrow, a spear was cast. But Yahweh protected me. Only its shaft struck. That is the last I remember." Izana folded his legs and sat in the sand before the man. "Surely. What is your name, friend?" "Judah." "I am Izana, a sojourner from the east," he said while cleaning his hands on his cloak. "Roll to your side so I may see how that wound of yours is faring." Judah rubbed his reddened eyes and forced his stiff body to turn. "Why do you help me?" "You were put in my path," he said dismissively, then he cut through the stitches to remove the silver coin. Judah clenched in pain, but was too weak to resist. "Do not move." Izana pinned him to the ground with a knee and threaded the needle. "I must close the wound," he said, and began weaving the flesh back together while dabbing away the blood with a cloth. "You do not have the hands of a healer," Judah whined. With a quick jerk, Izana tightened the length of twine made from dried intestine, and the ugly flesh formed together. "If you had the hands of a warrior, mine would not be needed to heal." "I am a Maccabeus, a holy warrior against the Roman oppression." Izana avoided Judah's stare, but focused on cleaning the drying blood from his fingernails. "The shadow of their empire has been upon this land before you were born. will be here long after you are gone. Judah rose to his knees, his breath rigid and fighting to avoid expanding his injured ribs. What do you know, Easterner? A master will not keep a horse he cannot tame, or send it to the butcher and sell its offspring. Zana removed the water skin from the cactus. He swirled the meager contents before taking a quick draught, then extended the skin toward the zealot. I do not wish to share your cup, Easterner. Weak-kneed, Judah rose to a stooped posture. You saved me, but I wish to find my brothers. So ask what you will of me, and then I will go. A grin creased his honest dried lips. At least you have spirit of a zealot. He tossed the water skin to the man and peered into his dark, defiant eyes. Very well. I need a guide to an inn on the south of the Galilee. Take me there, and then you are free of your debt. Judah's head nodded in sluggish agreement. He took a shaky step forward and grimaced as his torso shifted. I suppose you'd be wanting to ride Orin then. The zealot frowned. Can that scrawny beast even handle a load? Orin groaned, and Izana stroked his crooked neck to soothe him. I wouldn't insult him. He has a foul temperament. Lower lip clamped between his teeth. Judah bore his pain in silence as Orin descended the rocky heights. The sea air was humid, but fresh with the smell of the first catch by a crew of fishermen. Izana led Orin down a narrow goat's trail that snaked its way to the shoreline. The fisherman's boat disappeared behind a ridge at the base of the cliff that jutted out into the water. Once upon the sand, Judah swung a leg behind Orin's hump to dismount. He grasped onto the camel's hair with white knuckles, and his unsteady legs nearly buckled as they dropped to the soft beach. Izana followed curiously behind the antalgic Hebrew, who made a convicting effort to walk to make it to the galleon. Calf deep in the water, Judah knelt and cupped a handful of the cerulean sea and splashed it across his face. His short beard dripping, Judah turned with a smile. Izana was shocked to see the transformation. It was as if a new face was hidden beneath all that grime and blood. He had entered the water to follow the zealot's example, when a glint of Roman bronze caught his eye. 3 riders galloped along the shoreline below the shadow of the Golan Heights. Judah, blissfully unaware of the impending danger, felt Izana grasp him by the cloak and yank him off his feet. He collapsed with a shallow splash, and Izana was quick to muffle the surprised yell. He held him flat to the water and led them to the rocky outcropping that extended from the cliff's base into the sea. Once behind cover, Izana leveled his eyes to the stone, and Judah followed his example. The riders approached the beached fishing ship. 2 soldiers dismounted, while the third stood guard from horseback with a long pilum laid across his shoulder. The fishermen were herded from the boat by the threat of Roman steel and were formed into a line. Red plume ruffled by the sea air, the leader moved down the row of men. He inspected their arms, tearing away the sleeves of their garments to expose the flesh and any marking that would give them away as foes to the empire. His search unrevealing, the leader paced, kicking up sand with the tenacity of a caged lion. Judah watched in suspense, hoping the riders would move on. He could hear the repetitive clank of the Roman's blade against the armor on his shin, its edge glinting in the sunlight. Judah knew the men were not leaving without spilt Hebrew blood on their hands. The leader pulled a man from the line and threw him to the beach, the tip of his sword pinning him down. His barking voice carried along the shore. Izana turned to Judah, who had already stripped his shirt from his torso and was dipping it in the water. Feeling up for another fight already? And digging into the murky shallows, Judah pulled out a smooth stone the size of a large fist. Do you have a weapon? Would it do you any good? Izana watched him tie the stone into one end of the shirt, securing it tight with a knot. Judah's eyes narrowed. You should have left me to die. Left me to lie where you found me, he said, his voice hoarse but valiant, the shirt tied around his waist like a belt. He concealed the knotted stone behind his back. He lifted himself onto the ledge and made his way toward the fishing boat. "Farewell, Easterner." Izana smiled to himself. "Do not forget your debt," he called after Judah with a quiet voice. "I will be waiting for you when you get back." Shooting a hostile glance over his shoulder, Judah continued to limp his way along the beach. It was not long before the Roman on horseback spotted his approach and warned the captain. Stopped near from thrusting the length of his sword through the weeping man at his feet, the leader averted his attention to the new arrival. Eyes locked onto the Roman captain, Judah rotated his palms forward. Even from a distance, the soldier could distinguish the inked palm branches on the form of the man's forearms. A grin of delight formed on his lips, and he strode to meet the zealot. Like a lamb to the slaughter, Judah did not falter, and left his arms open at his sides. "Tell me where they are," the captain yelled out. "Tell me where your murdering pack of dogs are hiding, and I will make this quick." Judah interlaced his fingers before him and closed his eyes as if entering into a prayer. The Roman lofted his blade level to the ground above his shoulder, ready to strike. "If you do not use your throat to speak, I will cut it from you like a useless eye," he threatened. Maddened by the zealot's silent sacrifice, he swung hard with the intent of removing the man's defiant head from his shoulders. Hands tugging free the loose knot which fastened the shirt around his waist, Izana spun to his right. From a distance it looked as if the tip of the blade caught his throat, and his body swiveled in a complete circle, the wielded stone mimicking his motion. Coming around to face the Roman, whose surprised eyes revealed that he had believed his stroke to have dispatched the zealot, Judah used his momentum to whirl the stone in an arc like a flail. The length of his shirt gave him good reach and power, and the bronze helm of the soldier caved into the man's skull with a crumpling crack. Lifted off his feet, the Roman's head was wrenched in the opposite direction, and his neck... Lifted off his feet, the Roman's head was wrenched in the opposite direction, and his neck and torso twisted to follow behind. One more time, lifted off his feet, the Roman's head was wrenched in the opposite direction, and his neck and torso twisted to follow behind it. He landed face down, sprawled in the sand with his helmet permanently affixed to his skull. The soldier on foot spouted an echoing blasphemy that dripped with spittle down his coarse beard. His companion on horseback contained the fisherman with the length of his spear, while he rushed to inflict swift vengeance upon the Maccabees. Judah, already weak from the effort of his stroke, dropped to his knees beside the fallen captain and relieved him of his sword. The steel of the Roman gladius was a treasure compared to the single-edged facata or Macaria curved swords he'd been familiar with. Their iron was weak and often fell prey to the invincible edge of the Empire's short swords. Fingers gripping the wooden handle with whitened knuckles, Judah found his feet in time to parry a blow from his larger foe. The reach of the gladius was longer and its weight heavier than what he was used to. His feet backpedaled to gain room to swing. With a short facata, he could fight with swift hacking motions, but the gladius was for thrusting, and the Roman kept pushing close with the intent to drive his blade through the zealot's abdomen. A stride from attaining his goal, the soldier was caught off balance by a single rock ricocheting off his helmet. Judah glanced at the boulders where the beach met the base of the cliff, but there was no one to be seen. Both hands working to grip the handle now, he put his strength into a swing, but the Roman was quick to recover and meet his blade. The sword stalled in the air, each pressing its weight against the other. The Roman's physique was vastly overpowered the weakened Maccabees, and then the zealot's own blade was pressured slowly towards his neck. A frothy grimace of a smile formed over the soldier's clenched teeth, and Judah held his breath while he fought to resist. Judah repositioned a hand on the gladius's handle, and with a quick shove thrust the pommel into the Roman's nose. Wild with rage, the Roman lashed out and knocked the sword from Judah's grip. He stumbled away and recovered his abandoned shirt with its concealed stone. The bloodied Roman nearly on top of him, he fell back to a seated position. Another small projectile collided with the Roman's helmet, and Judah, why do I keep calling him Jodah? And Judah took the opportunity to lash the stone around the man's ankle and tug with all his might. Caught off balance by the two opposing forces, the Roman toppled hard into the sand. Judah side-rolled to pin the soldier's sword arm down with a knee, and used both hands to cup the large stone and pummel his foe into unconsciousness. Face white with pallor, Judah turned to see the final soldier galloping toward him, his pilum raised for a throw. The rider could not miss the helpless man if he were blind. Out of the corner of his eyes he could see a dark form approaching with a whirling sling circling above his head. A tether released and the stone shot from the sling's seat and met the Roman's forehead with such force that it knocked him from the saddle. The horse still charging toward him, Judah gripped the unconscious soldier below him and rolled his body on top of him to shield himself from the thrashing hooves. After the warhorse had raced off down the beach, Zana strode calmly toward the dizzied rider, who was struggling to his feet. In one quick motion he swept the man's legs out from under him, while ramming the tip of his elbow into the Roman's forehead. Without pausing to ensure the man stayed down, he turned to remove the hefty body shielding Judah. The exhausted but furious zealot shoved the Easterner's hand aside and rose, pain radiating from his side. Hands clutching his throbbing ribs, he felt blood oozing from the irritated arrow wound. Izana shook his head. "You have broken your stitches. You could have helped." Judah's swift retort seethed through his clenched teeth. Squatting to examine one of the soldiers, Izana picked up a sword and handed it to the zealot. "I do not think a sword fits you. You did much better with the stone." Judah accepted the blade with an irritated cough and turned to the fishermen who were already busy shoveling their boat back out to the sea. A man caught the stare of the Maccabeus and pointed an angry finger in his direction. "You cause only trouble! The Maccabees will only bring more oppression upon our heads." Heat flared from Judah's nostrils, and he tossed the gladius after the fishing boat. "You're welcome!" he shouted as the arcing sword splashed into the water. Sapped of energy, Judah's brain swirled with a wave of sparks, and he swayed before every joint in his body buckled, and he collapsed into the sand. Izana clacked his tongue as he approached, threading his needle with twine. "I must keep a tighter leash on you, my fanatical friend." Orin plodded faithfully over the rocks, heeding his master's call. "I know now you would not hesitate to take on the Empire yourself." I don't know if that's like a Dak reference from Star Wars there. Izana's eyes shot upward while he attended the wound. "I hope you know what you're doing with this boy." Dun, chapter 4. That was a short chapter. Hope you guys liked it. Thanks for listening. Good night.